Welcome to day 10 of the challenge. Yesterday you have learned how you can use forms in Angular and ASP to transfer data. And today we will take a look on how you can set up Angular services. Now every time we use the command to update the client API when we have adjusted the backend API and we created a new controller, then automatically in Angular a service got created. Well, as I said, that happened automatically. But in your future development, you will need to know how you can create services completely from scratch. And that's what we're going to do today. As I said, we already used the Angular services, the ones we generated from the OpenAPI spec. Today, as I said, we are going to implement an Angular service from scratch and then inject it as a service to multiple components. An Angular service is simply a class with an injectable decorator, as you can see here. Services can also be injected into other services. Angular services also allows you to share data across multiple different components. The service we are going to implement will keep the user information in memory as a field. Every time a component requires the current user's information, it simply picks it up from the service. Keeping the user's input in memory as a service field causes the data to be lost every time the user refreshes the browser for sure. As I said in the day before, during this 21-day challenge, we will not have a real authentication authorization login system using a SQL database. Instead, we will handle most of the stuff in memory. However, for a lot of applications, this is also a common practice, but in one of our additional challenges, which is, well, extending this one here, we will for sure cover authorization, authentication and SQL database. So no worries, if you need that for your job, you're definitely covered. Welcome to this video. We will now create our Angular service for authorization. Now, inside of your client app folder, open the source folder and click on the app folder. So we want to create a new directory inside of that app folder, right click on it and add a new folder and call it auth. Make sure in Angular it's all lowercase. So simply call it auth. Now select that folder, right click, open in terminal. So we want to generate a component inside of so we want to generate a service inside of that auth. So we want to generate a new service inside of that new folder. We can do that by using a command called ng angular g generate s service, and let's call it auth. Simply hit enter. Now you can see that two new files got created in the auth folder. We got the auth service spec.ts and the auth service.ts. Now let's go into that service. So open the folder and go to auth service.typescript. Let's first of all create an interface for possible user. So go ahead, create an interface. Let's call it user, and right now it only consists of a string called email. Now inside of that auth service here, we can write down under the constructor. You can even remove it if you like, but I will keep it. We can go ahead and create a field, current user of type user. Now we make that nullable or set it to optional being undefined, because sometimes a user may not be logged in. So we need to take care about that. Let's go ahead and write a simple method right here. Let's call it login user, and it's taking a user as a parameter for sure. And we will now set the current user, which is this field here, this dot current user, to the user from the parameter. Now we can also send in some logs. So console.log for us to make it visible. Log in the user with email, and then we can simply go ahead and use user.email. Now just to make that clear, our user is not really registering an account, right? So he will just come to that page where he wants to book a flight, and then he will have to provide some details like, okay, this is my email, this is my name, and he's good to go. So he doesn't set a password, he has no email confirmation or whatever. It's just for us to track the data of which person has booked the flight. Now, why did we decide to do it that way? It's pretty simple. authorization, authentication, and real SQL, well, permanent or persistent data storage is a huge topic itself, right? So we decided to split that up into another follow-up challenge, because in this challenge, we really want to focus on front-end and back-end development and how you can connect them both together. However, from the structure on that we are building here, you can in the end just go ahead, use that interface, extend it by a password, for example, and then really register a client, if you like, or a user inside of a real database, right? So the structure in the end will be the same, but it will be more advanced. Now we need to call that login user method from anywhere, right? So we will call that for sure once the user or passenger registers. So we're gonna switch over to our register passenger page here, go right into the TypeScript component. Scroll a little bit down, you can see subscribing here, right? So here we got the register passenger, right? This fills out the form, or here are the form informations like email, pre-name, and last name. And after subscribing, we want to log in the user, form posted to server, right? We can confirm that that worked. So we go ahead, and instead of console logging that, we will simply go ahead and call our auth service. Now, we don't have it inside of this component right here. So first of all, we will go ahead and use it here. Import auth service from auth service. There we go. Now we can use it inside of this component. We only need to get it into the constructor, private auth service. There we go. And now we use it here inside of the subscribe call. So this auth service dot login user, and we can submit an object for sure. And since the user interface that we have created only consists of an email address, we can simply go ahead and take this dot form dot get email. And we need to make a null check. And if we have the email field, we can take the value. We just add another brace here. There we go. And now we can start our application. Now, once the application is loaded and you visit register passenger page again and fill out the form and click on login, we can see log in the user with email jl@tutorials-eu.com. So our call on our new service is working. If not, we would not be able to see this here, and you can see the origin is set to auth service.typescript, right? So it's really referencing the correct script. Now we want to extend that just with a single call. So here inside the auth service, after the login user method call, add a comma, and then switch to the next line of code. And this is for error logging, like in every subscribe call that we did so far, right? So the first parameter is, well, what you want to do once you have that subscribe call coming in. And the second parameter is the error handling. And we want to log all of the, well, error messages inside of the console. So we simply say log them as errors into the console. Great. Okay, so if something goes wrong, we should now see in the console an error message appearing. And now we need to proceed and take care about some more information, right? So what, for example, if the passenger is already existing? And for sure, we also have to take care about when we want to display that registration page, right? Because right now there is no navigation to it and we really have to manually visit the page. We actually need to make that page working. We need to display it when we have no user, well, sort of signed in at the moment. And we need to handle what happens if we already have a user registered with that account. Let's proceed with that implementation in the next video. Welcome to this video. We will now take a look if a potential user is already registered. So if a user is registered and we go ahead and search in our, well, passenger list for it and it exists, then we automatically want to log in the user. And if not, we want to go ahead and show him a prompt. So what we do for this is we first of all create inside of our register passenger component, where we here register, right? We have that method here. We will create a new method called check passenger. And what that's doing, set it off type void. We'll take a look at that. We will write the code for that just in a second. But for now, we switch to our register passenger component HTML. So switch to the same component, but the HTML template, and now scroll down to the check passenger input that you have right here. For me, it's in line 5, right? And we will take an event here, and the event is called blur, and blur is taking place, or the event is getting fired once you select the input field and then deselect it, right? So once you move away from the input field after you have entered some values, this is when the blur event is getting called. And for sure we will now call the check passenger method that we have just created in the TypeScript component. So this one here will get called once the user has entered some email information. I guess you know that, right? It's sort of like you enter an email address and then you switch to the password field, and the email field is complaining about, hey, a user is already registered with that account, for example, right? You know that from other websites, I guess. So since we made changes to our RESTful API, we now go ahead and run our update again, so that our client-side code is updating, so that we can use our passenger service right here to find the specific flight, because yesterday we have created the specific endpoint for this. Now let's go ahead and do that. Right click on the client app folder, open in terminal, and let's run npx ng-open api-gen. Now let's wait a second. You can see that he wrote models.ts, models passenger RM, and passenger service. So now it's updated. And when you take a look at services, passenger service on the right side, you can see passenger RM right here. And you can find the implementation of our endpoint, which is find passenger right here. Now let me close that. Inside of our check passenger void that we have right here, we should now first of all take the email from the form. So let's set it to const params equals to new object email, the value this.form.get email, check if it's null, and if it's not, take the value. So we take the param, in this case we're just taking one, potentially we could for sure take more, and take from the form the email value. Now let's call the find method, so this passenger service dot find passenger. We can simply pass in an email address. You can see that here, params, right? So we can set in the values, so we can pass in the object. And now let's subscribe to it, dot subscribe, and we want to run a method, and inside that method we want to simply console.log passenger exists, and then we can go ahead and extend it logging in now. All right, that's great. So let's save it like this. We can test it now, or we can go even further and directly log in the user. So this .auth service.login user, and here again you can see we need an interface, or we need an object with the interface user implemented. Let's go ahead, create a new object, set the email to again this.form.get email, and then make a null check, take the value. Great, so it's exactly like we have it here, login user, right? So both of them are logging in the user by getting the email from the form. Okay, so now let me explain you what it does. Once you have registered, right? So we start the application and I register account like Yannick at test.com. So the first time I do that, it will register and post it into our list in REST API, so ASP, right? Now we have the information about who registered in that RESTful API, and the next time I would come to that page for registration and I write down my email address like yannick@test.com, and then I click away from that input field to, for example, select my first name or write down my first name. The check passenger method here would get called because of the blur function that actually gets sent from the input, and then this code would start. He would go ahead and try to find the passenger with the email that I've just entered. And if we found one, he would go ahead and log me in instantly. So I'll save some time, do not registrate, do not have to register again. He simply sees, okay, Yannick@test.com, I got that user already, I will now log him in. Okay, that's fine. Now let's start our application. Great, so here we are again at register passenger. I filled out the form, check the email address, Yannick@test.com. Now let me log in. Now here we are at register passenger page again, and I filled out the form, check the email address yannick@test.com. When I click on login, you can see log in the user with email address Yannick. Now let's just take a look. When we come to the page again, and I now write down the email address yannick@test.com, right? And now I click away. The blur event will fire then. You can see that. There we go. Passenger exists. Log in the user with email address yannick@test.com. So this worked, right? The moment the blur event fired. So once we clicked away, you can see I can definitely reproduce that. And then the find method will find the email address from the RESTful API call, right? And then we have the information here loaded. Great. So in the next video, we will go back to our code and just make some small improvements just to increase the maintainability. I bet you saw in the last video that we have this auth service login user here with that email, and we have that here too. And we can definitely simplify that, right? So that we make it definitely way more maintainable. So let's go ahead and create a private login method, right? So this .auth service is exactly doing the same, right? So let's copy that line of code. Let's paste it in here so that we have it like this now. Login this auth service login user email, and exactly doing that. So instead of calling it here, just the same code, we can simply say this.login, then add a comma for console error logging. Now for sure we have to adjust the formatting here now. Let's do that real quick. There we go. Now that should work fine. And again, we can also do that here. Passenger exists. Login in now. Can go ahead and simply call this.login here too. So if you paid enough attention the last time, you will know that this now will fail. If you don't remember that, it's absolutely no problem, because here's really a lot of stuff to learn, right? So let's start the application and take a look why this is failing. So let's try to log in here. And when I click on login, you can see that we don't have the information about the user is logged in, so we don't receive anything here. What we have to do is we have to take that private login method right here and change it so that it is an arrow function instead, to keep track of the keyword this, right? Only that way we can use the auth service. So if we don't do that, the auth service will not be available for us, right? This is because of TypeScript. And to be more specific, the reason is because the indication context is set at the timing of defining a function. Now, I wrote that in lowercase here because it is sort of a variable right now, right? Let's do this here too. So everything is now in lowercase. That looks fine. And now listen carefully. So in C# you have this keyword here. So this is always referring to an instance, for example. Now in JavaScript or TypeScript, at least TypeScript will be converted to JavaScript, so TypeScript is sort of JavaScript. This can also be a method or a function, for example. In this simple scenario here, the keyword this is not referring to the instance of the register passenger component, like it would be in C#. Instead, this is referring to the arrow function that we are creating. Now, the arrow function here inside of our subscribe call, you can see that if I hold the cursor above it, function void, right? So the arrow function here does not know any login because login is inside of the component. So if we want to go ahead and call login from the subscribe here, we go ahead, remove the arrow function just like this. And now this keyword here is again referring to the class. So to the component, and now again he knows login. We also have to do this here. You can see the arrow function, and this will be referred to the arrow function. So this means this arrow function and then call login. But this arrow function doesn't have login. So again, we remove the arrow function, just like that. Remove the curly braces and simply call this login. For now we can get rid of the console log right here. Okay. Now we can save it and try it out. So at our page with everything filled out, let me click on login, and you can see login the user with email yannick@test.com again. So now it's working. As I said, keep that one sentence now in mind. In C#, the keyword this is referring always an instance or at least a specific class. But in JavaScript and TypeScript, the keyword this can also be related to a function. Now it's time to really implement that page logically into our application. Because right now we came here just by /register passenger. We should now go ahead and once we click login, redirect automatically to search flights. Great, so see you in the next video. Now after logging in, we now want to redirect the user. So scroll to the very top and let's first of all import something from Angular router. So import router from @Angular router. There we go. Now we can use it inside of our constructor as always. Private, there you go, router of type router. Now inside of our login call, we got that right here, right? This login user. Afterwards, we go ahead and call this .router.navigate, and we navigate the user to, we define that in an array, search minus flights, and we don't have to provide any additional parameters. So after logging in, just go ahead, bring the user to search flights. Let's save it like this. And now here in this call, passenger service find passenger, right? This one gets called when we blur the input field. It's potentially possible that we get a 404 error, which makes sense. Just think about that. Imagine the scenario, you go to a page and the first time you write down your email address, you for sure are not registered, right? Because you're here for the first time. So after writing down your email address for the first time, this check passenger method will get called. He will try to find a passenger. He will not find it because you're here for the first time. So we will get a 404, which means not found. But in this scenario, it's totally fine. It's not an error for us because like, oh, you're here for the first time. For sure, we didn't found anything. So if you take a look at the console right now, you would see for the first time you enter your email address and restart the application, you would see an error inside of the console. Let me show that to you. So let me just write down Yannick@dev.com. And now when I switch back, the blur event will get called. And you can see 404 error. Hey, I cannot find Yannick@dev.com. But this should not be an error because it's totally fine, right? And that 404 error doesn't really make sense here. So we can just ignore it in that specific case. So inside of that subscribe call, so right after this login, let's check if we received any errors. So let's go. Error goes to function console.log error. And what we can do is, or we can not cancel log, we can cancel error. That makes more sense. We can log that error here, but only if it's not of type 404. So if e.status is not 404, then we want to log it. And if it's 404, we will for sure ignore it that way. So let's go ahead and run our application. Now, when I'm here, let me re-enter some information, Yannick@dev.com, and you can see that it says still 404, but that's the default error and it might be gone once redeployed for production. But the more detailed error, which is giving really a lot of information to users, that one is gone and got removed by our code, so that's fine. Now let me fill out that one here and let's see what happens once we click on main. And let's see what happens once we click on login. You can see we got redirected and even logged in. Log in the user with email Yannick. Now again, let me switch to /passenger, register passenger. And now let me write down, ignore that favicon error here. Let me write down the email again, Yannick@dev.com. And now let me switch to first name. You can see that we automatically got logged in because he recognized Yannick@dev.com, right? So that's a very great way to create some really reactive applications, right? So you hook into some cool input events, for example, and then run some code to make the life of yourself and your users way easier. Now, right now, we only get to that register passenger page when we really enter the URL. So let's go ahead and adjust that so that it's automatically showing to us once we start the application. Now go into your new go into the component book flight, that book flight component right here. And inside here, in the ng on init, we want to go ahead and redirect the user if he's not signed in. But for that, we for sure need our auth service. So let's go ahead and get it here. Auth service from auth service. There we go. Now take it inside of the constructor, private auth or auth service. That's fine. Auth service. And now we can go ahead and in ng on init. So once the component is initialized, we check if this auth service dot current user is null. So pay attention here, right? This auth service current user does not exist. Then we want to go ahead and call this router dot navigate to / register minus passenger. So see, book flight. Okay, so this will only take place once we click on booking a flight. That's fine. Now let's take a look at the application again. When we visit it, so in our search flights, and we click on search, and now we click on book, right? American Airlines, let's click on book. You can see that we now have to sign in, and I already did, right? So Yannick at dev.com, and now when it asks me and I click to first name, he will see, oh yeah, Yannick.dev.com is existing, and he will automatically redirect me to search flights. So you can see that we now have to make some adjustments for sure, right? So we should not get redirected to the search flights again, because now I again have to book, and now I can do that, right? So we need to fix it a little bit to keep the user flow the correct way, but at least we have our passenger registration page now implemented.